Welcome everybody who's joining. I want to say thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to give people just a couple of minutes to log in before we get started. But if you are interested in introducing yourself in our chat, please do. We'd love to know who's joining us tonight and really appreciate everyone being here. We'll get started at about 5:02. Great to see some of our CCH team members joining us this evening or late afternoon. Our partners from across the state, great to see all of you too. And folks, we're going to get started in just about one more minute as people get logged on. If you're interested in introducing yourself, we encourage you to do that in the chat so we know who's here. Appreciate everybody joining, and yeah, we'll get started in just about a minute. Really great to see people from all across the state joining us tonight. Thank you, virtual world that we now live in. All right, good late afternoon, early evening, everyone. My name is Cathy Alderman. I am the Chief Communications and Public Policy Officer for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. I'm really excited to have you all join us this evening for what we build as our legislative preview, but what it really is the first quarter review, because we are just a month into session. But before we get started, I want to give a huge shout out to my team. We have Aubrey Wilde and Andrew West, who join me or oftentimes spend more time at the Capitol than I do, working on all of the important issues we're going to be talking about. But then we've got our other three team members in the background who are making these slides look lovely, who are running the slideshow, setting things up for us, answering questions. So a big shout out to Alexis Witham, our Director of Communications, Gabriella Visani, who works on our internal communications, and Shannon Webster, who works on our social media and other public education opportunities. Couldn't do all this work without this great team, so just want to make sure you all know that they're all here with us this evening. So what's happening this year for Colorado Coalition for the Homeless during the legislature? Next slide. So we are in the first regular session of the 75th General Assembly. Each General Assembly basically is a 2-year process, and they have first session and second session. Session began on January 8th, so just about a month ago, a little less than a month ago, and will adjourn on May 7th. And that is by rule, so they can't extend session unless they call a special session. So we know we've got 120 days to accomplish a lot of work. The session starts, as it does every year, with the governor coming and doing a state of the state and laying out his priorities. This year, our governor, with his libertarian spirit, identified freedom for the state of Colorado. But frankly, put this in context, a lot of what he's talking about is with the new federal administrative change, how do we keep Colorado separate and independent, moving along at the pace that we're moving in terms of our policy priorities. He also highlighted affordable housing, an issue that has been on the legislature's mind for the last 4 or 5 years. But this year, because we're in a tight budget, we're going to see a lot more implementation housing, regulatory housing issues, maybe some administrative changes or some consistency requests for housing codes. But we probably won't see a lot of funding investments because unfortunately, we're going to be seeing some big funding cuts across the board. The governor continues to highlight transportation, wanting Colorado to be in the forefront of public transit across the state. Love to see it. He's always expresses his priorities for better energy and a better, cleaner environment, addressing climate change. And back to his libertarian spirit, he wants to see regulatory reform. How do we make things easier to do with less administrative work? How do we address some labor issues like wage theft and making sure that people can function in the workplace together? And then the budget, as I said, we are facing a $1 billion budget gap this year. And so unfortunately, we're going to be fighting to protect a lot of the programs that we care about. And we're probably going to have to see some cuts in some of the things that we care about with the hopes that we can restore those in coming years when we're not in such a budget crisis. Public health, safety, education, and public welfare are always part of the governor's priorities. And this year they will be as well. Next slide. So what are some of the key themes that we're just feeling in these first few weeks? Well, we've already seen a lot of housing bills, even though there's not a lot of funding. We're going to continue to see a lot of implementation issues related to housing. Because of the change at the federal level, there's going to be some things that we're going to have to put in place to make sure that Colorado can protect its priorities and make sure that Colorado does get to continue to operate independently of the federal government's, in some ways, very harmful stated priorities. There's some real tension around immigration. We're starting to see even folks who have been very sympathetic to immigration issues starting to feel the pressure from the public and wanting to make sure that we're walking a line of protecting people's rights and their ability to achieve a better life for themselves and their families, while at the same time, wanting to be protectors of rules and laws that have been placed for years. We do have Democratic majorities in both chambers, not the same kind of supermajority that we've had for the last couple of years, which I know Andrew is going to dive into with you. But I caution people to say that not all Democrats are the same. They all have their different priorities, and while we know that they may lean one way or another on certain issues, they oftentimes are taking very distinct stances and less groupthink, I think, than people think might happen in the parties. And I think that's in line with how Colorado operates in general. We know, again, that libertarian spirit flows through both our Democrats and the Republicans, and it just expresses itself differently. Next slide. So I am now going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrew West, and he's going to talk through kind of the lay of the land, and then we'll get into some of the specific legislation that we're working on this session, and then tell you how you can get involved and work with us to support our priorities.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cathy, and thanks everyone for joining this afternoon, evening. My name is Andrew West. I'm the policy associate here at Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and I'll give a quick overview of the new composition of the state legislature. There are 100 members who are democratically elected. There are 65 representatives, and as Cathy mentioned, in the House of Representatives, the Democrats lost 3 seats. And lost the supermajority, which was required to do a few things that I'll touch on in the next slide. On the Senate side, in the most recent election, there wasn't much of a shift. There are still 23 Democrats and 12 Republicans. And I'll mention quickly on the House side, they serve 2-year terms while the Senate serves a 4-year term. In terms of the supermajority, the House Dems have lost their supermajority in the 2024 election. But as Cathy pointed out, that doesn't mean that they don't still have a lot of power in the state house. There are 44 seats needed to hold that supermajority, which allows them to do some special things, but including overriding a governor's veto, referring a constitutional measure to the ballot, and amending House rules. And I'll say that even though the Democrats have lost their supermajority, it's still their second largest majority in decades that they've had. So we're definitely still in a Democrat-controlled state house. With the new election, there's been a bit of shakeup in leadership on both chambers. On the House side, the Speaker is still the same. And I'll note that the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives do similar things, but they're both the presiding officers of their respective chambers. They're elected to that role by each party's caucus and really oversee the larger operations of the chamber. The majority leader is Monica Duran, and they schedule legislation for consideration on the House floor, plan meetings, plan legislative agendas, consult with their members to really gauge where the party's at on a lot of different issues, and generally work to advance the goals of the party. And this is obviously supported by the assistant majority leader. The co-whips are responsible for assisting party leadership in managing their legislative program on the House floor, maintaining communication throughout the party, pursuing key legislation and things like that. And then the caucus chairs obviously help to lead the caucus and set the agenda for meetings and also work to shape the party's agenda. On the minority side, these roles are pretty much the same, but just operating with a bit of a different perspective. And then over to the Senate side. The roles are mostly similar, just that in the Senate, the leading position is referred to as the president rather than the speaker. I'll also note a couple of the JBC members who are highlighted on here. And when we talk about the JBC, that is the Joint Budget Committee. They are charged with studying management, operations, programs, and the overall fiscal needs of both agencies, departments, all over Colorado's state government. Throughout the year, the JBC will hold regular meetings, including in the interim, even outside of the legislative session. And they consider a whole bunch of documents and priorities to help prepare a budget recommendation for the General Assembly. So the JBC members are really important and have a lot of power. And in 2025, the chair is Senator Bridges. The vice chair is Representative Shannon Byrd. And then other members are Senator Amable, Senator Kirkmeyer, Representative Sirota, and Representative Taggart. And I'll note that a lot of these leadership positions are already existing members in the General Assembly. I'll give a quick overview of how a bill becomes a law, a little throwback to civics class, but the process can look a little bit different in Colorado, although not too much different. In the first chamber, so being the chamber of introduction, assuming the bill is a House bill, it will go through both chambers, but it will begin the process in the House. When it's introduced in the House, it's given a formal number. So a lot of the times, and throughout this presentation, you'll hear us refer to bills by number and also just by title. And generally, if a bill doesn't have a number, that means it hasn't been introduced yet, and it hasn't been assigned to a committee. But once it does that, it's given a number, assigned to a committee. It can be scheduled for a committee hearing, which is where a lot of the discussion and public input happens. The committees are smaller groups of legislators, usually between 5 to 13 legislators who come together and have a more narrow focus. So committees can include agriculture. Today I was in the House Judiciary Committee. There's transportation, housing and local government, health and human services, and they all focus on different areas of bills. Once a bill is in committee, there's an opportunity for public hearing. So not only do the members of the committee get to discuss, they also hear from people like us who work at nonprofit organizations and other partners who advocate on behalf of a bill or against a bill, but also members of the community who want to weigh in. If a bill passes through its committee, it can either go through Appropriations Committee, which is a separate group that determines the fiscal or budgetary implications of a bill, or it will go directly to second and third reading with the whole floor of with the larger chamber, sorry. So if a bill doesn't have a cost or fiscal note, it'll go straight to second reading, and otherwise it'll go through appropriations. The second reading is where there's a bit more discussion on a bill, and they discuss amendments and can bring all that forward. And then the third reading is a more formal vote. Assuming the bill passes through that first chamber, it will go through a mirrored process in the second chamber. I know this graphic might be a bit hard to follow, but this is adapted from another graphic that I found even harder to follow. So this is hopefully a bit better. At the top here, you'll see all parts of the process in the legislature, but below the vote or governor are considering once a bill has been passed. So it passes through the legislature and it either goes to a vote of the people. As you might remember in the last election, there are a lot of ballot measures that we get to weigh in on, or it'll be signed by the governor or allowed to become law without being signed. Returning back to the legislature in the second chamber, it'll go through that mirror process where it goes through a second committee hearing. It'll go through a second reading on the floor. And they can either decide to pass the bill without amendments and say we like it as is, in which case the bill is passed, or decide that they would like some amendments to the bill. So say there's a House bill that passes with amendments, it goes to the Senate, and then it will have to, if it's amended in the Senate, it will have to return to the House. If the House accept those changes, the bill is then passed. And if they reject, they have to go through a negotiation process that's called the conference committee, where they really dive into those policy issues and try to iron out some sort of compromise. And then if at any point a bill doesn't pass, it is considered dead and the bill is lost. So if we talk about a bill has been, doesn't get the votes, if it's killed, if it fails, or if it's postponed indefinitely, those are all to say that the measure is dead and will become a law. Next slide, please. All right, I think I'm passing it back to Cathy here.
The mute button would get me at some point in time. Hi, everybody. For those of you who weren't able to join, I'm Cathy Alderman with the Education Advocacy team here at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And this session, as in most sessions, we've laid out our legislative priorities in 4 buckets. The first being affordable housing, and then more specifically, making sure that any current resources are used for housing that is where the greatest need is. And we know that is for lower income households trying to exit the cycle of homelessness, and just making sure that we're not using very limited public funds to address housing needs for higher income households. Particularly, we're focused on affordable housing in the rental space, but also on the home ownership side. And we want to make sure that housing rules and laws are fair and just and don't prevent the kind of affordable housing that we need desperately in the state from being built. Our second legislative priority is to support the infrastructure on homelessness. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this on the next slide or two. But ultimately, as a state, we just need to see more infrastructure and investment on preventing and resolving homelessness. And we need to make sure that there are no laws that are put in place that make the cycle of homelessness worse than it already is, or somehow prolonged because of criminalization activities. We're always focused on creating more access to health, both on the primary health side as well as the behavioral health side, making sure we have parity, and making sure that we're really focused on those populations that have consistent and systemic barriers to accessing healthcare, and making sure that we're funding healthcare in appropriate ways so that folks have that access. And then we continue to focus on issues of economic justice, including reducing barriers for folks that need to get into the workplace or that need to get into housing, and how they can access the things and resources they need in order to do that. Next slide. So one of our first top priority bills this session is House Bill 1032. It's being sponsored by Representatives Rutinel and Valesco. Essentially, we have seen all of the news reports and heard from the reports that we put out. Homelessness has increased by 30% since 2024 in the state of Colorado. We've seen an increase year over year, and still the state is only investing federal funds in homelessness and doesn't have a lot of infrastructure in place, I think, to address homelessness from a prevention and resolution perspective. What we've been hearing from providers across the state, and be really interested to hear from some of you on this webinar tonight, is that they don't really know how to plug into the state response on homelessness, that they know they're doing great work in their local communities, they know where their funding is coming from, but they're not sure how this all works together. And so we've put together a legislative proposal that we hope will address some of those concerns. Next slide. Specifically, House Bill 1032 will reestablish an interagency council on homelessness. This council will live out of the Department of Local Affairs and be led by the Division of Housing with the Office of Homeless Initiatives, and really will work towards bringing agencies together across Colorado to identify gaps in the system, to leverage resources, to figure out who's doing what in the homelessness space and how can we do it better. And at the end of a 2-year meeting process, we hope to have at least the outline of a statewide strategy on homelessness prevention and homelessness resolution. And that will give, I think, a sense to the organizations across the state about what role they can play and how they can better coordinate with the state on implementing effective homelessness programs. This will also require a report to the General Assembly on an annual basis of the work of this interagency council and the work of the Office of Homeless Initiatives in regards to what it's doing with continuum of care organizations and with our newly created navigation centers. This second point has really been folded into the first. So as part, now that the Interagency Council will be living with the Department of Local Affairs, the meetings that the Office of Homeless Initiatives is having with continuum of care organizations and having with navigation centers will be part of the annual report required both of the Interagency Council and the Department of Local Affairs. The next piece of this legislation will essentially allow like-minded governments, so that's counties and municipalities, to form regional authorities to work on homelessness issues together. We have heard time and time again across the state that local governments are wanting to work together. They're wanting to recognize that homelessness is not a specific issue for a specific zip code, but rather crosses city and county lines all of the time. And how can they work together? And we're hoping that this particular piece of the bill will create a structure in which these counties and municipalities can come together and form a regional homelessness response authority. This authority will ultimately be an entity that has some taxing and contracting authority that can bring in some revenue to spend on a regional basis, and that can also contract with some of the providers to deliver those services. Again, this is something we've heard from providers across the state as being a need, and we're hoping that this structure will really give folks something to formulate around so that they can address homelessness in the appropriate way, which we know might be on a regional basis. And the final part of this bill is to allow document fees, which are currently collected by every county, be used for affordable housing. And in Colorado, a fee is something that is collected on a regulated thing, and the fee must be used to offset the administration of that thing. The document fee is collected on real estate transactions, and so we are saying that the fee should be used to offset the cost of maintaining and recording those real estate transactions, but it can also be used for affordable housing. Nothing in the legislation requires local governments to use their document fee in this way. There's just simply an allowance, and so that local governments who are desperately looking for ways to address their affordable housing crises will have access to additional resource. And now I think I am passing it on to Aubrey.
Thank you, Cathy. Hi, everyone. My name is Aubrey Wilde, and I'm the Advocacy Program Director here at Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And I'm excited to tell you about Senate Bill 8, which adjusts the Necessary Documents Program. And if it feels like deja vu, you're correct. This has been a multi-year effort. Last year, we tried to tackle this issue through Senate Bill 211 towards the end of session. Didn't end up with a long enough runway, so we refined the bill, worked with partners, and it's in even better shape this year. So we're really excited to introduce it early. We've got a great set of sponsors, Senators Henriksen and Kipp, and Representative Froelich, who's really versed in these issues of human needs. So some background here. This program provides vouchers for free identification documents. Typically driver's licenses, state ID cards, and birth certificates are the most common ones to people who are victims of domestic violence, folks who have been impacted by natural disaster, folks with low incomes, people living with disabilities, and folks experiencing homelessness. This program has been around since 2006. It first was developed by nonprofit leaders and philanthropy leaders, and then it was incorporated into state statute. After reviewing this program every few years as it sunsetted, it was finally made permanent in 2021. Currently, it's funded at $300,000 annually. We know that this doesn't come anywhere close to meeting the true need. We also know that there are some other significant barriers in terms of the administration of the program that we hope this bill can solve. So, unlike last year, we are narrowing our scope a little bit because, as Cathy described, it's a really tough budget year, and we're going to be looking at trying to prevent cuts rather than trying to expand funding for the things that we know are so important. So, Senate Bill 8 would do one primary thing. It would eliminate the need for a physical voucher to reduce administrative burden through the program. Right now, this program is operated based on paper vouchers that are cut out by hand, distributed to about 2 dozen nonprofits, primarily concentrated in the Front Range. And then those are distributed to the folks who can actually take those to a DMV or vital statistics office to redeem them for a free identification document. It's really complicated, and all of this together leads to lapses in communication between all of these different entities, and it leads to folks losing their vouchers or just not being able to use them before they expire. Um, Ultimately, there's about a 30 to 45% use rate, so it's really quite low, and we want to see that increase. What we're trying to do with this bill is go voucherless. We want to go paperless. Let's keep up with the times and allow people to just go straight to the DMV or vital statistics office, say that they are part of one of those qualifying groups, provide all of the eligibility or all of the identity documents that are required by these state agencies, and then have that fee waived right at the point of service. And now I will pass that along to Andrew.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Aubrey, for that overview. The last main priority bill that we're working on this year is titled Housing Protections for Victim Survivors. And this really, it's House Bill 251168. We're working with Representative Mandy Lindsay, Cecilia Espinosa, and Senator Mike Weissman. And this bill really we aim to highlight the intersections of gender-based violence, housing insecurity, and financial abuse. We know that gender-based violence is a leading cause of statewide housing instability, and that instances of domestic violence, domestic abuse, stalking, and other unlawful sexual behavior really often can lead to homelessness, unfortunately. About 1 in 10 people throughout Colorado cite that an experience of domestic violence contributed to their experience of homelessness. And there's a lot of pain and trauma from these experiences that can contribute to long-lasting economic consequences, in particular housing instability. So what we're looking to do with this bill is build on and strengthen existing protections while also creating some new ones to hopefully remedy the situation and reduce this source of experiences of homelessness. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, there are some already existing provisions within the law, but there are unfortunately some shortcomings that have created limitations to serving clients. This is something that we've heard a lot from our partners at the Colorado Poverty Law Project, who we're working on the bill with, that the existing protections, while helpful for a lot of people, are insufficient to meet the client's true needs. So we're aiming to build on existing protections and create new ones to remedy housing stability, make sure that people are able to retain their housing, stay in their homes, and overall avoid eviction and experiences of homelessness. The second prong is around due process and access to justice, so ensuring that victim survivors have a legal remedy and addressing some of the barriers that currently exist to accessing justice. And the third thing is concerns around immediate safety. So we want to ensure that victim survivors are protected from harm and dangerous situations by addressing some law changes related to housing. So in those three buckets, the bill does a few things. It's a bit of a long bill. It aims to accomplish a lot. But in that first bucket of housing stability and security, we want to establish better enforcement of lease break protections. So a 2017 law allowed a victim survivor to end their lease early and be only on the hook for 1 month's rent. If they can demonstrate that they are a victim survivor, they only owe 1 month's rent to the landlord if they are able to demonstrate that they suffered a loss as a result of the tenant fleeing early. What we are hearing in practice is that a lot of landlords are routinely and sometimes knowingly violating this provision of the law. So we want to establish better mechanisms for enforcement and also clarify what a landlord has to do to regain that 1 month's rent or further rent. The next provision is protecting a security deposit and ensuring that a victim survivor isn't on the hook for any damages that are caused by an abusive party. So we want to really protect an investment that they've made in their rental housing and in the security deposit by ensuring that they aren't on the hook for damages that really weren't caused by them. The last thing in this bucket is more time to move after an eviction. There are some populations of Colorado that already have extended time to move after they're served an eviction notice, and we want to expand that to victim survivors. So they have more time to move, perhaps find a new place and get back on their feet. The second part around due process and access to justice, the main provision here is that we want to expand the availability of an affirmative defense in cases of non-payment. So what that means is that if you say that you have had an experience of domestic violence, domestic abuse, or other populations covered in the bill, that you would be able to assert that as an eviction defense. Currently, you're able to do that for lease break violations, but not cases of non-payment of rent, which we know is one of the main things that lead to eviction and homelessness. So we want to expand that availability of affirmative defense and allow for a tenant to repay that rent. This would both allow a tenant to maintain their housing, but we also hope that it will make a landlord whole and actually recoup the money rather than having a tenant never pay that rent and never being made whole. The next part within this bucket is easier verification of one's status. So currently one's required to submit a police report or a protection order, and we want to expand that to a third-party letter from a service provider like someone like Coalition for the Homeless or a lot of our other awesome partners that work with victim survivors, or allow them to self-attest to their status. The last thing is improving some court protections, extending timelines when someone can demonstrate that gender-based violence contributed to the eviction. And then the last thing around safety from harm, we want to guarantee safety adjustments to the unit. So one of the main things that we've heard is that tenants are having difficulty changing their locks. Sometimes a landlord will say that that is a violation of the lease to change locks in that way. So we want to ensure that that's not only a violation of the lease, but that tenants are permitted to do so. And we also want to protect confidentiality for tenants who are victim survivors and make sure that their records aren't public and make sure that information about their status as a victim survivor isn't disclosed to parties who don't need to know all of that. So this is a big bill. It aims to do a lot of things. And that was actually just introduced yesterday. So we're excited to be moving forward on that. We can go to the next slide here. And then Aubrey, I think I'm passing it back to you.
Thank you, Andrew. So you just heard about our 3 priority bills. We are co-leads on those bills, which means in partnership with one or more other partner advocacy organizations, we researched the issue. We talked to people who were experiencing the issue on the ground. We convened a robust group of stakeholders to give feedback on the issue, and we are dedicating lobbying resources to make sure that those bills make it to the finish line and get signed. So what I'm going to talk about next are a suite of bills that we're taking a position on, which might mean we're just signing on to a letter or a fact sheet saying that we support something. It might mean that we are going into committee and testifying in favor or against a bill, or maybe just in a monitored position. Or maybe we are working with other partners or legislators to tweak a bill that is going through the legislative process. So those fall into a number of different categories that are kind of subcategories within the 4 big buckets that Cathy described. And before I get into those bills, I want to shout out Danny McCarthy. He is our longtime lobbyist. He's worked with us for nearly 10 years. He's always at the Capitol. He's got his finger on the political pulse. He's the one playing 4D chess, as they say. So he is helping us get sponsors on all of these bills, securing votes, helping set up negotiations so we can make sure that the folks we care about are supported through all of these policies moving through the process. So thank you, Danny. I think he's on tonight. We really couldn't do it without him or the other partners that we work with during this process. I know we've got some other partners on the call, like Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault and the Denver Foundation. Thank you all of our partners for being with us in this work. So some of the subcategories of bills that we'll talk about are housing, renters protections, homelessness, economic justice and public benefits, criminal legal reform, voting rights, healthcare, and substance use disorders and harm reduction. These all fit into those four main buckets, but we like to break those out just so we can manage all of the huge volume of bills moving through the process that we are going to be engaging in. And some of these bills have been introduced, some have not yet been introduced. And you can see if it has a number after the bill title that has been introduced. So that's already moving through the process. And there'll be a symbol before the bill title, either a red X or a green check mark indicating our position. So the first subcategory under housing, we've got one bill in this category so far, but we know that there will be more to come that we'll likely have to work on amending. But this is one that we are happy to support. This bill, House Bill 1030, increases some accountability around accessibility standards and building codes. It aligns with more nationwide and worldwide standards. So it's a pretty bare bones floor at the coalition. When we build, we try to exceed those floors. So we are happy to support this bill. As in the last several years, renters protections is a big bucket. We've got several bills that we'll be engaging on this year, at least four that we're supporting and one that we know that we'll push back against. One is around tenant and landlord law enforcement. This gives local governments more power to help enforce certain renters protections and clarifies the Attorney General's powers. One addresses price coordination between landlords. This might sound familiar because there have been lawsuits going on around landlords colluding and increasing their rent prices. There will be a bill around improving the infrastructure around portable tenant screening reports. We want to make sure that people don't have to report their credit scores because they already, under Colorado law, don't have to do that. But the companies that use these portable tenant screening reports and send those along do report that. So we're trying to align that a little bit. We are working on protections for tenants with housing subsidies. Specifically, we're trying to close some loopholes in existing law and increase penalties for any landlords who violate these laws. And then House Bill 1092 is one that we are firmly against. This basically would allow landlords to jack up rents when people exit the property and they put it back on the market. It kind of redefines what reasonable means in terms of the terms of a lease. So we don't want to see that bill pass. In the homelessness space so far, we've seen one bill that has moved through the process, unfortunately, has already had a hearing and died. This is a bill around squatting. So it establishes a new crime of squatting and assigns some pretty significant jail time and fines to folks who violate this proposed law. And our position, Andrew actually testified against this bill today, did a really phenomenal job. Our position is that this further criminalizes people who are just trying to meet their basic needs. And it also is redundant. There are already processes for eviction, and there are also processes for law enforcement to take around trespass and burglary. So this just isn't needed, and it serves to harm more than it does to help. I also want to talk a little bit about some bills in the economic justice and public benefit space. One bill that we are happy to support and have offered some feedback on is around protections against deceptive trade practices. And what this does is it offers some transparency in the offering of displaying or advertising price information for goods, services, or property. And we're particularly focused on the property piece. So this serves to help reduce the use of junk fees to essentially jack up the amount that renters are paying unfairly. We're also supportive of a bill around protections for victims of economic abuse. This dovetails really nicely with the bill that Andrew described around victim survivors and some of those housing protections. There's a lot of overlap there, and grateful for our friends at Violence Free Colorado for leading that. We're also supportive of an idea to expand a restaurant meals program to Colorado. This would allow SNAP beneficiaries, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is what that stands for, and that helps people afford their food. And this expansion would allow users to get prepared meals, so restaurant meals, for example. This is really important to us because folks who are experiencing homelessness probably don't have a safe space to store or prepare ingredients for a meal. So if this is an option, this expands people's ability to get nutritious and warm food, which can be really nice when you're facing the elements. And then finally, we're supporting an effort to reduce food waste. This will allow faith groups to more safely and easily donate unused food to organizations like ours that can use it and pass it along to the folks who need it most. And I'll send it back to you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. I'll touch on a couple bills that address criminal legal reform. The first one is House Bill 25-1015, clarifications to online bond pay, which are a lot of partners are working on, including the Colorado Freedom Fund. This is a clarification of current law that already says online that bond can be paid online. Excuse me. This clarifies that the bond can be posted online by credit card and makes other conforming amendments to ensure that the existing law is followed. There are some issues with this not being followed in certain parts of the state, and it makes it much harder for people to access justice and get out of jail when they are legally able to. So that's House Bill 1015 that we are supportive of. The second bill, this is failure to appear charges in municipal court, has actually been introduced as Senate Bill 62. And this bill prohibits a person's failure to appear in court from constituting a charge against them. And this is reflective of a practice of some municipal courts where they will charge people for contempt of court. And this is one that our partners at the Colorado Freedom Fund and ACLU are working on. It adds failure to appear and contempt of court as a list of laws that cannot be enacted. So what courts are doing is oftentimes for really small charges, stacking them by adding contempt of court and heaping on penalties and fines to make that charge more burdensome. The next one, also around municipal courts, is fairness and transparency. This would ensure that municipal courts are conforming with similar conditions and law as afforded to state court defendants. So it caps sentences that have a comparable crime at the state level in municipal court to ensure that there aren't disparate sentences depending on which court someone is charged in. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 01, Colorado Voting Rights Act, is a bill that does a whole bunch of things around voting rights to make sure that Coloradans are not infringed upon in their ability to access the ballot. This is in part in response to some changes at the federal level and potentially concerns around the Federal Voting Rights Act and making sure that we're able to uphold protections and maintain Colorado's gold standard voting system, even if things change at the federal level. So it prohibits racial discrimination in voting, protecting access to voting areas for all eligible voters, including protected classes. And it also creates, or rather, it targets the denial of voting rights for protected classes, including race, color, ethnicity, and language access. So that is a big priority this year that Colorado Common Cause is working on with a lot of other great partners, and we are definitely supportive. And the last bill in the healthcare bucket, there are a lot of bills that move forward in terms of healthcare, and we're right now in the process of figuring out which ones will be relevant to the coalition and how we can weigh in and get involved with that. But this bill is Senate Bill 45, Healthcare Payment System Analysis, and this is one that has been brought forward in past years that would require a state analysis of a potential single-payer model for the delivery of healthcare. The proponents think that this has a lot of possibilities to do good in expanding healthcare access, reducing costs, and making sure that all Coloradans are able to be covered. It is mostly a study bill, so they will provide recommendations to the General Assembly, but it doesn't actually bring any change in the healthcare system unless legislators decide to go back and make those changes. And under the last bucket, we've got Senate Bill 44, which increases criminal penalties for synthetic opiates, including fentanyl. This is a bill that we have fought back against in the last few years, and I believe this is the third or maybe even the fourth iteration of the bill. We testified last year in committee to oppose the bill, and we'll likely do the same thing when the committee convenes on Monday. But this bill would increase criminal penalties for opiates, including fentanyl, regardless of whether someone knew that a substance had fentanyl in it. So current law requires them to know that something has fentanyl. Obviously, it can be used as an adulterant a lot of the time, and people may be using a product that they don't know contains fentanyl. So this would remove that provision and create really strict penalties for possession. We advocate for a harm reduction approach and don't want to criminalize people who use drugs. Instead, we want to focus on substance disorders as a public health problem and promote public health solutions to address that.
All right. Well, I hope some of these bills got you all excited and made you want to learn more and possibly get involved as an advocate. We've got one of my favorite days of the year coming up, our Lobby Day. This will be on Tuesday, March 4th, so exactly a month from today. And this will be an opportunity for you all to come to the Capitol, hear from the famous Danny McCarthy and some of our bill sponsors about how to be an effective citizen lobbyist. And we're going to pull legislators off the floor and have conversations with them about our own lived experience, about the data, and make that ask for them to support these bills that we care so much about. You can register using a link that will be dropped in the chat. And we really hope to see you all there. There are limited spots, so please try to sign up as soon as you can to reserve that spot. And we're going to do a couple of different things this year leading up to our Lobby Day as well. That Friday before, so February 28th, we're going to have a prep session from 2 to 3 p.m. over Zoom. It's going to look a little bit like this. We're going to refresh on our three main bills, but we're also going to talk about what the day is going to look like once we all convene at the Capitol. We're going to talk about tips and tricks for sharing your story and making that ask, and just get everyone comfortable with the idea of becoming a citizen lobbyist. And then after that, around 4:30 that evening, this is completely optional, but the education and advocacy team will be at Woods Boss, a brewery near Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And we'll be there just to chat and do a little role play if that's helpful for folks to practice some conversations that they might have that following Tuesday. So please join us, have a drink, and we can get really comfortable and excited with the idea of lobbying that following week. So please register as soon as possible to secure your spot. And now we can open it up to questions. There are a couple questions. Oh,
Oh, I was just going to say a couple of things. So this was a fabulous list of things that we are involved in, and it's still not even the full list. As Aubrey mentioned, some of the bills that we know are coming, we know about, and we've been able to work with sponsors and advocates in the background to kind of shape what they might look like before they come before us. But we also know there's going to be a whole bunch of more bills to come. So as we provide updates throughout session, we'll be revisiting all of the ones that we talked about today, but there will be new ones on the horizon. And then, yeah, I was just going to go ahead and say we've gotten some questions in the question and answer, and I think that most of them are probably on some of our renters protection bills. And the first one is, how can a landlord recover the cost of repairing damages if the security deposit is not accessible for that purpose?
Yeah, sure, I can answer that. So the bill clarifies that a tenant who has demonstrated that they are a victim survivor is not liable for damages caused to the premises by an abusive party. In the case that the abusive party is also a tenant, they could still use some of the abusive party could still be on the hook for damages caused to the unit. And in the case that, say that there was maybe not domestic violence, but there was a case of stalking and someone else caused damage to the unit, that is property damage that a landlord would have a remedy to pursue under existing law.
Thanks, Andrew. Another one is about our involvement with the Denver Basic Income Project. Yes, we were involved, and the question is, what were the outcomes? Is that a solution for people experiencing homelessness? It seems like a foundational way to impact people experiencing homelessness. Aubrey and Andrew were very involved in managing that project and can speak to the outcomes. But what I will say is that basic income, while yes, I think you're absolutely right, it is an obvious way to help people experiencing homelessness. It is also an expensive way upfront. It does require a large upfront investment that the state budget simply can't support this this cycle. And I think we're looking at the philanthropic community for additional support, but it's not fully fleshed out yet.
Yeah, I can add to that. So what we found was that about half the people who participated in the program did end up getting housed by the end of the study period, that initial year study period, which was really, really exciting to see. We also heard a lot of personal stories about how successful the program was for people. So we're really encouraged about the power of universal basic income. And we are going to be part of a group of advocates studying different options, including potentially a ballot measure down the road, and what that would take to get there. So stay tuned. That definitely is something that's on our radar.
And the next question is about volunteer opportunities after business hours. Obviously, this is one attending our Ed series or attending this Ledge preview to get updated. Aubrey mentioned our prep meeting that's going to happen at Woods Boss. If you're talking about volunteer opportunities for advocacy, yes, sometimes we do go very late into the night at the Capitol, but we don't always know that. And so most of the work does take place during business hours, but that doesn't mean that you can't email, make phone calls, write letters in your free time. And I will also just add that we have lots of opportunities to learn about what we're doing that don't necessarily require action, but you being an informed community member is going to make a big difference in how we continue to advocate. And then there was a question in the chat about these bills we can vote on? And not necessarily. So citizens don't actually get to vote on pieces of legislation that are before the General Assembly, but what they do get to do is vote for the members of the General Assembly. We vote for our House members every 2 years and our Senate members every 4. So maybe it's 4. And so you should be paying attention to make sure that the people that are representing you are doing so in a way that you as a voter are comfortable with. And then there was another question in the chat about, will the recent Supreme Court decision about the unhoused affect our state or our homeless population? The answer is absolutely yes. We're already seeing that. The Supreme Court decision basically allowed local governments who have camping bans to enforce those camping bans, whether or not they have services to provide those individuals that they are enforcing the camping ban against. And pretty soon after the court case passed, Aurora and Douglas County both changed the underpinnings of their camping bans to allow for enforcement despite the lack of services in the community. And we're unfortunately believing that that's going to happen in more communities across the state of Colorado. So our job is to make sure that we're advocating against those dangerous policies and providing the services that folks need on the streets to help them get out of that cycle of homelessness. Next question is in the Q&A. It says, landlords often have property and even multiple property keying systems and legitimate needs for emergency access. How can this need be met while allowing for protective lock changes needed for victims?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can answer that. Yeah, we definitely don't want to make any changes that would prevent a landlord from accessing their property, especially in the case of an emergency. So we want to ensure that the landlords still do have access to that while also allowing for a tenant to have their safety insured for by making reasonable changes to a unit. In practice, we hear that a lot of landlords are supportive in making those changes, but we want to ensure that it does not constitute a violation of the lease if you need to make a change to the locks, but a landlord would still be given access to the property when needed, of course.
Thanks, Andrew. And then there's two questions that are kind of the same that Aubrey has volunteered to answer, but I'll go ahead and read them out loud. The first is, what is a portable tenant screening and why are we for it? And then the follow-up question is, will the portable tenant screening report clean up or provide any clarity of which screening tool tenants should use, which ones landlords have to accept?
Great questions, folks. So portable tenant screening reports are tenant screening reports that can be used at multiple different properties when a tenant is applying to live there as a renter. Right now, we're hearing stories, or previous to this bill passing, we have heard stories about people applying to dozens of apartments, wasting hundreds, even thousands of dollars on getting those reports, and also a lot of wasted time as well. So this allows somebody to use that one screening report for multiple properties within a 30-day period. And this was established through House Bill 23-1099, so from 2023, about 2 years ago. And this required that, except in certain circumstances, landlords must accept from a prospective tenant a portable tenant screening report. It has to be prepared by a consumer reporting agency within 30 days, and it goes into detail about what must be included on that screening report. So when I spoke about some of the tweaks we want to make to that, that bill allowed or required credit history to be included, but we have some stronger Colorado protections on that now, so we need to allow that to keep up. It does, to somebody's question in the Q&A, require rental history to be shared. I think I hit on some of those main pieces, but I'm happy to drop the previous bill into the chat. We haven't seen the cleanup bill introduced yet, but we'll be sure to communicate out if there are updates on that.
Great, thanks, Aubrey. The next question is, CCH supporting any legislation that will help provide housing for homeless parents with children? The short answer is obviously that any program, that would be specialized for families entering the cycle or in the cycle of homelessness would require some state funding. And unfortunately this year, as we've mentioned multiple times, that there is no state funding. But our hope is that with the Interagency Council being stood up and working together, that family homelessness will rise to the top as an issue in Colorado that has gone far too long unaddressed. And that some of the recommendations that come out of that council, as well as some of the information that we hear back from the continuum of care organizations, will be that we need to make family homelessness a priority in the state, and we need specific interventions that include both programs and resources for families, both to prevent them from entering the cycle of homelessness to begin with, but also to help them move out of it as quickly as possible. Let's see. I had a question about enjoying all of this presentation, which I love to hear. And are there opportunities for medical students to get involved? Yes, you're here right now. You should stay involved with us, but you should also look at some of your professional associations that might represent you one day when you're out of school and practicing, because they also have great advocacy opportunities. Another great resource is the Colorado Community Health Network, which is the Association of Federally Qualified Health Centers, of which Colorado Coalition for the Homeless is one of them. They focus a lot on making sure that we're providing healthcare access to those households at lower income levels and those households that are experiencing homelessness. And so I would encourage you to get connected with CCHN. We have lots of partners in this space that appear in many of our reports and some that Aubrey mentioned, but I'll ask my colleagues if maybe they want to recommend any other organizations that we might suggest they be connected to.
I think you hit the main ones, Cathy.
Okay. And then I did see another question in chat about the food access bill and whether or not someone would have to use their SNAP benefits in order to access the food from restaurants. And I actually can't remember the answer to that. So maybe Aubrey, you might know.
Yes, so this bill would direct the state to work with the USDA to create an infrastructure to allow Colorado to participate in this statewide model or this national model that allows people with SNAP benefits to use those for hot restaurant meals, so pre-prepared meals. But through that process of creating the infrastructure, they'll identify exactly what the qualifications are and how that will be rolled out. This will not be an immediate implementation after this legislative session. It'll take some time.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions, but I do want to direct everybody to the chat. Our colleagues here have been putting some great resources in the chat related to many of the questions that you've raised, and I hope that you find those helpful. Would highly encourage you to continue to follow along with us during this legislative session. It's bound to be a good one. Stay connected with us through the Advocacy Network. Please join us for Lobby Day. And please join our education series as we take some deeper dives on issues related to homelessness. See that we're bringing up our potential final slide. Would just say thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It is so critically important that you stay engaged even in this very chaotic and uncertain time. We will be doing this advocacy work at the